to the Boardwalk Talk series brought to you by the Alabama Aquarium at the Dauphin Island Sea Lab. My name is Mendel Graber. I am one of the educators here at the lab, and I am joined by Greg Graber, another one of the educators here at the Sea Lab. And today we're going to chat a little bit about Earth Day, about the history of Earth Day, about the movement, about how it has the impacts that it's had through the years, and about some of the local events that celebrate Earth Day, and some of the ways that you might participate in Earth Day. So we'll start with a little bit of history about Earth Day. So the first Earth Day was held in 1970, April 22nd, 1970. Earth Day is on April 22nd. And there were several events in the 1960s that kind of entered the collective consciousness of the American public, and they were a driving force behind the environmental movement. In 1962, Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, and it was kind of an expose about the effects of pesticides on birds particularly, but also the environment in general. And what was kind of unique, that spoke to people uniquely about Silent Spring, was that it encouraged people, citizens, to push for change. So instead of invoking the government to regulate, and that was the eventual effect of this. So that was, a really important outcome of the environmental movement. But it started at the grassroots level. So it was encouraging people to push their politicians to make these changes. And it was incredibly popular. It was attacked by some folks as being anti-progress, but the attacks on Silent Spring actually didn't last very long. There was a lot of support for the changes that she was promoting, suggesting. And so that was in 1962. So this is kind of leading up to the 1970 Earth Day. At the end of 1968, there was a photograph that was taken by NASA. Actually, I have it. Across the moon of the Earth. It came to be called Earthrise. And so the astronauts had gone to study the moon, but kind of a remarkable thing happened where they looked back and saw the Earth and documented what they were seeing from space. And it's just this blue marble out in the vastness of space. And it contextualized for people how unique our living planet is. And it was kind of a rallying point for a lot of people in the environmental movement. And so that happened in late 1968. In 1969, there were a couple of environmental disasters that really caught a lot of public attention. The Cuyahoga River in Ohio caught fire, and this was an event. That same river had caught fire several times before, but it was documented and picked up, and it got national attention. And there was a lot of industry on that river, and the people who lived around there often kind of thought they looked at it as a part of the industry. But when people from outside that area saw the images from that fire, and that fire didn't last very long. I think it lasted for about half an hour, that particular fire that was captured and garnered so much attention. But it was so dramatic to see a river on fire, and it really made people think about the pollution that was going into that river. And there was also an oil spill off of the coast of Santa Barbara, California. It was a spill, it was a blowout, a well blowout. So about 3 million gallons of oil spewed into the water, and there was a congressman from Wisconsin, Gaylord Nelson, who had been concerned with the environment, and he had been interested in establishing some environmental political initiatives, and it hadn't gained too much traction until this point. He went out and he saw the oil spill in Santa Barbara, and he was reading about teach-ins on college campuses, and these had been used as discussion points for the Vietnam War and for the civil rights movement. So there was a lot of activism during that time, and much of it was focused on the war, the Vietnam War, and the civil rights movement. But he saw the environment as an important point for activists to take on. And his initial idea was to organize teach-ins on college campuses. And that evolved into what became Earth Day. So there was not a lot of enthusiasm initially coming from the college campuses for the teach-ins for the environment. And he hired someone to kind of manage this campaign named Dennis Hayes, who was a grad student at Harvard. He left in order to manage this initiative. And they kind of changed direction. One of the things that Dennis Hayes noticed was that there was a lot of interest from parents who were concerned about the state of the environment and wanted to enact change for their children. And there was a lot of interest from schools, from K-12 schools. So they kind of rethought this idea of the teach-in and reformulated it into Earth Day. And so after they started promoting this, some of the college campuses showed interest, and I think there were Earth Day events held on 2,000 campuses that first Earth Day, and about 10,000 schools and in hundreds of local communities. And they ended up with a lot of buy-in. So for the first Earth Day, 20 million people participated. And it's referred to as a protest, an Earth Day protest. And so these people were demanding change. They were demanding legislation, and a lot of important legislation came from, the people demanding change. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, was formed in late 1970. The Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, a lot of environmental protection legislation came from this push for environmental protection that was coming from grassroots, from citizens demanding change. One of the things that Dennis Hayes decided that I think was pretty important about that initial Earth Day was that they were not going to try to copyright or trademark Earth Day, and they weren't going to try to restrict how people celebrated Earth Day or protested and demanded change, how they were going to observe Earth Day. And so people all over the country have their own kinds of Earth Day observances. So some of them are celebrations, some of them are actions like cleanups, some of them are protests. So a lot of different activities encompassed under the Earth Day umbrella. Another interesting thing about Earth Day is that it's a single day to recognize Earth action and the need for environmental protection, and it brings a lot of attention to the issue on that single day. But of course, one of the phrases that has come from that is Earth Day every day. And so I think a lot of people understand that we should celebrate and protect the earth every day, but that focused attention on that single day is important for that awareness and the collaboration. And through the years, Earth Day has tackled a few different initiatives. It is now organized by earthday.org, and it has spread to nearly 200 countries.
Wow.
And billions of people on Earth celebrate Earth Day. And one of their initiatives this year, again, they're not dictating how Earth Day is celebrated in order to be, logged on their website and use their organization. But one of their initiatives is the clothing industry on the environment. So a few things that they are would like to bring awareness about is different types of clothing have different impacts on the environment.
Yes.
And one of the phrases that we use now is fast fashion. So there are a lot of inexpensively made garments, and people buy a lot of them, and they don't wear them very often. It turns over quickly. The fashion turns over quickly, and so people end up buying a lot of clothing, and they don't wear it very often. So this causes problems from the production of the clothing. It uses a lot of resources to transportation, to storing the clothing, and then the clothing itself. So as it degrades, we've got this problem with clothing going into landfills, or then it may be incinerated. One of the things that we might think about is recycling clothing, but very little fabric actually gets recycled. So then it has to be, or it becomes a problem of we'll put it in a landfill, incinerate it,
right,
or it degrades. So before we move on to the problems of the microplastics, which we are seeing coming from clothing in recent years, we've recognized that a large portion of our microplastics in the ocean, 35% of the microplastics in the ocean are estimated to come from clothing. But just a few things. So I wore clothing for a specific purpose today. Most of the clothing that I'm wearing, I got at thrift stores, or these pants were pass-alongs from a friend. I got my shoes at a thrift store. So some of the things that we can do to minimize this effect that we are having on the environment is to buy secondhand. There's an awful lot of clothing already
out there.
Yeah. A lot of nice clothes to be had secondhand. And so then we're not generating more clothing if we purchase that way, or we clothe ourselves that way. And it's not using as many resources to produce them. It takes them out of the loop for needing to dispose of them. And another way to think about it, there's several different ways to think about the effects. So natural fibers are one way to, there's one way to compare clothing would be natural fibers to like polyester. So I'm wearing linen and cotton. And I prefer to wear linen and cotton because they're more comfortable to me, but they don't have the problem of the shedding of the microplastics. So the microplastics plastic is a petroleum product. So clothing like fabrics like polyester and nylon are made with petroleum. So cotton and linen are plant-based. They can also have their issues. There are pesticides that are used for, for crops, for
farmland
clothing. Farmland. So there is, there's land that is stripped of forest and used for crops,
sure,
and there are sometimes pesticides used on these crops. So there's still something that solves that. And you can get organic cotton that has less of the pesticides. And you just choose clothing that is, it will last longer. The actual item of clothing will last longer, but it's kind of a, kind of a classic style instead of something that's very trendy. Maybe you can wear it you can keep it in your closet longer. Or if you are somebody who likes to turn over your wardrobe pretty regularly, you can do that secondhand. So send it back to the secondhand shop and restock your wardrobe secondhand, and it kind of closes that loop.
And so with that idea, using those plastics and that sort of thing, the plastic clothing, whether it's a fleece or whether it's a shirt like this, for years when we were doing plankton classes and that sort of thing.
Well, before you get into that, let me just add that the plastic, sometimes the plastic, like fleeces, are, they may be made out of recycled plastic, like recycled water bottles.
Yep. So recycled shoes, sunglasses, that sort of thing at this point.
There's a lot of different ways to kind of examine the impacts.
Right.
So you may get a fleece that's made out of recycled plastic, and that can be a good thing. But then Greg's about to tell you a little bit about the life of that plastic, that fleece garment.
And so for a long time, and we've been doing this a long time at the Sea Lab, but using plankton nets, and they're actually right here behind us, you can see some plankton nets, and we teach multiple classes about plankton, and we have researchers that do plankton work around the world. But for us in the coastal area, it was one of those exceptions to the rule in the early 2000s that if we brought a plankton sample back into our classroom and we were looking at it under microscopes, we'd be like, hey, weird, look, there's a red, blue, green something right there. Well, what that red, blue, green something that is very distinctly different colored from the debris of plants breaking down and that sort of thing, it was very obvious that that was some sort of a fabric, piece of string, piece of flaked off fleece or whatever that had wound up back into that water system. And when we happen to wash our clothes and we wash our fleeces, they do shed. And there's a really big push to figure out different weaves of those fabrics from some of the big outdoor companies, to figure out how we can minimize pushing out those microplastics when they're in our wash. But we are now, not as that the weird exception, this is now kind of the rule when we pull plankton nets, that we see this stuff all the time now. In our microscopic plankton samples, we see fabrics down here, whether it's from rope tying off a boat or whether it is from something like a fleece or whatever that could be pieces around of polyester or whatever. But we see it now on that tiny microscopic level next to some of our plankton species like copepods, which are kind of like the character that's on SpongeBob that he's based on, among many other of the smaller things. So speaking of microplastics and kind of switching gears a little bit at least to what we're talking about.
Well, okay, so we're talking about microplastics, but let's go back to plastic in general. And so I did mention that plastic is made from petroleum. It can be, actually, plastic can be made from other things as well, like cornstarch. You can have different kinds of plastics, but most of our plastics that are in use are made of petroleum. Some of the alternative plastics are, they are being developed and used, and so we may move away from the, from this as the technology develops. But plastics will break down over hundreds of years. But what happens is they break into smaller and smaller pieces. So this is how we get the microplastics. So we've got a
variety of different kinds, and all of this stuff has been found by us on shorelines and by us.
Oh wait, here we've got some macroplastics first.
And so you can see actually the difference. So macroplastics versus that term microplastics. And when you think of micro, you think of not being able to see it with your naked eye. But actually the term microplastic is any plastic that is size 5 millimeters or less. And macroplastic is anything bigger than that. So whether it is a cigarette butt or anything larger than that, 5 millimeters is considered macroplastic. And so you can see that change. I'll try to shake it out so you can see a little bit of the different varieties. But these could be a variety of things, from Coke bottle tops to plastic bottles to any other thing that's made out of plastic. And then what helps create those plastics, this is a fun word right here. This is called a nurdle. These are a bunch of nurdles. And nurdles are what are melted down to create other plastics, and whatever that may be used for. But this is how they kind of start out. And they're found across shorelines around, and you can imagine it doesn't take much for a bunch of these to wind up being in a sample of water if they get out. So, but these are some of the ones that you can easily see with your eye that are moving around. But then when you start thinking of what we find on the beach, sometimes it's not quite as apparent. But if you look, you can see the color change. And when we see them in a plankton sample, kind of like in this sample, the plastics stick out kind of like a sore thumb because of the typical color that is going to be associated with what's in our water, whether it's the blue here or whether it's the red up top or the red underneath. These would be considered those microplastics that make it a little bit difficult. But as they're drifting around, of course, plastic floats pretty well, and you can see these fibers that wind up out within our watershed and out within our water areas. And then, of course, they make their way to the shoreline, and so we pick these up along the way in some of our various classes that, that we are doing beach walks and collecting plastic, just doing our job to leave our footprints rather than anything else. So we will hopefully keep it cleaner when we're seagrasses and other stuff. Some of this might be a little bit difficult to see, but when it's separated out, you can definitely see it in those samples.
So one of the ways that plastics turn into microplastics is in our washing machines. So we mentioned the fleece, but also other kinds of polyester or nylon. And so they break down, and you'll end up with these small pieces or fibers that actually will go into our, water treatment. And a lot of people don't really understand how water treatment works. So water treatment plants often, it will be treated and recirculated, but some of it goes back into the environment. And so these microplastics can be introduced into the environment through our, home municipal water systems. And they are being found ubiquitously all over the world. And this has been in the last few years that we've been looking for microplastics. They're in the most remote places on Earth. They're in high mountain lakes. They're in the bottom of the Mariana Trench. They are now being found. People are now looking for them in our food chains. So they get smaller and smaller, and the smallest animals can eat them at the bottom of the food chain. And so scientists are examining how these move up the food chain, and they are hormone disruptors. Plastics are hormone disruptors. It's not entirely clear how these might be affecting human health, but you all might remember that a few years ago, scientists identified BPA in plastic water bottles and plastic food containers as having human health effects, and there was a push to
switch out our water bottles.
To encourage people not to use the BPA, to let people know that was having health effects. And so there's the potential that these microplastics are having health effects that we don't understand yet as they enter our food chain. And they're being found in humans. So
there was just a couple of big papers just published about one being found in human food for consumption, and then being found within human bodies, basically
in human digestive tract.
in human tissue, and so throughout time, looking at this project within the last couple of summers, for example, our summer high school course, we've had some students study the gut contents of some common fish around here, like white trout that people go fishing for here to have a fish fry with. Some of them were using ground mullet, another coastal fish that people use for fishing and, and frying up. But in most of those specimens of fish, in their guts, there were visible signs of little pieces of plastic in their gut, all the way down to, like she said, the bottom. And when you're talking about Mobile Bay, the bottom is kind of funny because we're talking about 10 feet, right? But we were pulling a net just a couple of years ago, and we found a parchment worm tube. So it looks like paper, hence the name parchment, but it was a big worm tube, and within its burrow that it creates, this worm tube that it builds, it had little chunks of microplastics, not just at the top, but stuck into the tube down into the sediment, which is pretty interesting. And so they were visible. I mean, you're talking about mud and then something bright blue sticking out of it, or red. I can't remember the color of it, but it was very apparent.
Sylvia Earle called the marine debris and the plastics going into the oceans the other oil spill.
Right.
And I think that's a useful perspective. An oil spill is, it's really obvious to us, I think, the ways that oil spills harm the environment. And so to think about all this plastic and it's being concentrated in major ocean gyres, and we call them great garbage patches.
And the gyres are where large circular currents converge, and when they converge, they bring some of this stuff out. And so you can see these are representative of some of those garbage patches, and which can be a little bit of a misnomer because it looks like it's one floating mountain of garbage, but it's over a vast area. There is a significant concentration of garbage that is around. And there are people, speaking of Earth Day and that sort of thing, there are people right now that have created ships that are, their job is to attempt to do their best at cleaning up these ocean debris areas.
Yeah, so there have been efforts to
in and around here
keep the plastic from moving from onshore out into the ocean. So these are a couple of different designs that people have come up with to collect debris as it moves through the water. So these debris containment systems.
That Dog River right there. So that's local to us right here.
And I think these are important, but it's also important for all of us to stem this tide of garbage at the source instead of trying to catch it once it's in our water and in our oceans.
Yeah.
So with that, I think we could talk about, the things that we all can do, because we are the source of this tide of debris flowing into our waters, and it's affecting, the animals that are in the water, the ecosystems, and it's affecting human health as well. So again, I mean, we kind of started talking about clothing because that's one of the initiatives of Earth Day this year. But I think we could also talk about single-use plastics, things you use once and throw away, like water bottles, single-use water bottles. It's
cigarette filter.
Yeah, it's a lot of people are now using reusable water bottles. I think that's great. But there are still a lot of single-use water bottles that are being used by Americans. A lot of the single-use products, things that you use once and throw away, that increased during COVID. And I think we were all conscious of, germs, and we were using those measures as a
rubber gloves
response to that.
If you touch something.
But I think it's time to recognize the pressure that we've been putting on the environment through our COVID response, and try to respond to that. And so things like again, water bottles, it's easy enough to just carry a reusable water bottle. Disposable cleaning products, there There are,
The wet wipes we just toss.
yeah, a lot of different kinds of disposable cleaning products
Right.
that we could, cut down our use or eliminate the use of those. And then, I think that's a really important message, is to stem the tide at the source. But then we've also got these initiatives for cleaning them up. So we have some information over here about Coastal Cleanup, which is held in September. This year it's September 17th. So this is from a few years ago, but it was some of the things that were collected, some numbers about participation and different kinds of items that were collected.
And so with the changes of coastal cleanup and that sort of thing, one of the fun things about it is that this is actually now a citizen science project as well. And there are a variety of apps with NOAA creating a marine debris program. That's what we call it, as marine debris, ocean garbage, ocean trash. But you can actually be a part of helping track and deal with the numbers of plastics. So we get an actual number to the count of some of these things that are going within the water. And so there are a variety of apps from the Nature Conservancy.
Clean Swell app,
yeah, the Clean
This is
Swell
Ocean
app.
Conservancy, and it's in partnership with Alabama Coastal Cleanup. It's called Clean Swell.
And so you can actually, anywhere you are, you can actually document where you are with this. And it doesn't have to be a whole trash bag full. You can just be walking down, pull up the app, and pick up a water bottle top that you just found, and you could add it, and it adds to that scientific data about where the trash is, where could it be coming from? Because if you're picking it up in, say, a Walmart parking lot, that's still marine debris, and when it rains and it runs down into, water, it could wind up down here on the shoreline. So tracking that movement is another big topic as well, and just seeing where the sources are and then where it winds up, and being able to track it and get a number behind it is also important.
So in 2020 and 2021, COVID kind of impacted the way we were living, and we weren't gathering in big groups for, these events are being held again. There's a major Earth Day festival that has been going on for...
We've been taking part in it for 20 years since we've been here?
Yeah, I'm not sure when they first started that, but there's an Earth Day festival happening on Saturday. And there is there's some other observances of Earth Day locally. There's Keep Mobile Beautiful and Love Your Community are having an Earth Day celebration at the, grab my notes here, at the Japanese Gardens in Mobile on Friday. Cool. Friday, Earth Day. Earth Day is April 22nd on Friday, but some folks are observing it on the weekend, on Saturday. Correct. So that's from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Mobile Japanese Gardens. The Mobile County Recycling Center on Hitt Road is having an Earth Day celebration on Friday from 9 to noon. There's a Mobile County Earth Day art contest for students, and entries are due by the 30th. We're having a boat excursion on Friday, so if you'd like to take a trip in Mobile Bay and learn about the estuary, the animals of the estuary.
You might even get some microplastics in our plankton sample.
Let's hope not.
That's right, but we have been.
I mean, we might. The information's on the website.
And there's a salt marsh excursion as well.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Tomorrow.
So several ways that you might participate in an Earth Day observance. You can celebrate by learning about your ecosystems and about the importance of these ecosystems and their importance to the earth and to you.
Or just pick up some trash when you're walking down the road and help stem that tide just as a everyday person walking down the road.
Observe Earth Day at festival type celebrations, or by taking your recyclables and learning about the ways that you can reuse and recycle and reduce and
about the recycling, we have recycling centers for the local people in the audience we have them around town as well. So you can take your trash, your recycling, not your trash, your recycling to several places around, like the Hit Road one. There's one right behind the police station, off of Government, between Government and Airport as well. There's several of them around as well, but you can actually, help reduce some of this.
So if you don't have curbside recycling, you
Correct.
can take it to one of the local recycling centers. So a lot of different ways that you can observe Earth Day this week, but we also hope that you will be conscious of the ways that you can celebrate the Earth and protect our environment and our Earth for the future throughout the year. Earth Day every day.
Thank y'all.